Welcome back to the channel, guys. My name is Graham Dorley, and you join me here at Response Motors for the GT3 build. And today, we're gonna start removing the front end of the car, which means drilling out a bunch of rivets, removing a ton of seam sealer, grinding down some welds, and then pulling the front off. So if you haven't already, click that subscribe button, turn on those notifications, because we've got a lot of awesome content coming right up. Before we begin, we want to make sure we got all our tools ready to go, and this job's going to require a couple interesting things. We got a stiff wire brush. This is to remove all that seam sealer, uncover those welds, get rid of extra any paint. The heat gun here is going to heat up the panel so we can pop off the panel bond. We'll show you how to do that. Of course, you got a drill, got a ton of batteries for this guy. I've got a pneumatic one as well, but I'm going to try using the battery one to see if that's good enough. Then the drill bits. So I went and found a 1/4 inch bit is pretty close to the size I need for the rivets, actually slightly smaller because the rivets are all metric. So these should be good to drill them out. These are cobalt steel, and you're gonna need something like this for hardened rivets. Hopefully these will be good. I also got some carbide diamond tipped ones just in case. If not, then I've got to go to a coated drill bit, which is going to be expensive. I'm gonna have to order those, but willing to do that. It's going to take a couple days to get those in. Then of course I got my YouTube equipment. I got my face mask, so make sure you always have good protection for both your respirator as well as eye protection here. Got my drink, some marking equipment, and then I've got some gloves on my bench. So gonna show you what we're gonna take off, and then we're gonna get to it. All right, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna remove some of the seam sealer that's around the main body here, so we can clearly tell by how sloppy this was that this was repaired before in the previous accident. So this front panel must have been replaced. I'm not sure if they put the whole front on or it was just this. So I'm going to grind this out. I'm also going to remove some of the seam sealer and paint down here to expose these rivets all around the bottom. And then we're going to start going around the crash rail, and I'll kind of show you what we're going to do as we move along here. And then we're going to move on the inside and take off some of those panels. So let's begin by getting rid of some of the seam sealer. So the first try revealed quite a lot of seam sealer painted on. This stuff gets really, really gooey, and so it started getting out of hand real fast. So what I did is I went and drew, hopefully you can see here with the Sharpie, where the panel actually attaches to the car. So this is where I'm gonna focus on removing just around here and then seeing how much we can get off. I'm gonna continue using the wire brush for now. If this doesn't work, I might move to a razor blade or even to a grinder to see how it goes. So let's keep going and see how far we get. Got off a lot of it with the wire wheel, but now there's a bunch left in these cracks. So I'm just gonna see if I can't just peel it back, because I need to expose this bond here in order to heat it up and get underneath. So I gotta remove the seam sealer here. Exposed a bunch of the rivets though, so I'm gonna go ahead and try and drill these out in a minute just to see how effective my drill bits are before we go too far, if I need to order anything special. But making progress. It's super messy, really annoying, but it is coming along, so let's keep going. Made a lot of progress using the wire brush. However, I noticed quickly that it's a little big for some of these areas because I have to get all the way in up here. There's just some rivets, as you can see, around here, as well as some spot welds. So I went and picked up a couple new things. I got a circular brush now, so I can get in and really try to get right where the panel bond is in the gap, clean this out nicely, so I'll be able to heat it up and break that gap. And also picked up a countersink tool, because what I want to do is use it just to kiss the outside of the panel here, clean up any of that rivet that might be left, because when it comes time to break this, if there's any of that rivet there, it's gonna be really, really hard to do. So this should help make sure all that's gone. And lastly, my oil finally came in. So I got some lubricant. So always want to keep your drill tips lubricated and cool. They'll last you a heck of a lot longer and allow you to drill through some hardened steel. So I'm gonna switch to the different wire brush and we're gonna keep going. So we're looking down at the top. I got a lot of the undercoat and seam sealer off, and you can also see some of the blue, which is panel bond. So this gray material, this is like a rock chip prevention. That's why it's sprayed all in the wheel well. And then it's also got some seam sealer mixed in, and then you've got this blue panel bond stuff. So there's a bunch of different things going on here, but it looks like the front end actually slides into a slot that's in the A-pillar of the body structure. So then the top has a couple self-tapping screws, as well as looks like this is where the two pieces mate. So I'm gonna remove the hood flange just in case there's something going on under there. And also I'm gonna try to clean up underneath, see if I can get this in focus. Clean up underneath here because this is where the two pieces must join up. So I'm gonna clean this off, I'm gonna get those top screws undone, and then I'm gonna keep working on this area to figure out exactly how these two mate so that I can go ahead and separate them after all the seam sealer's gone. So let's get to it. Well, as you can probably tell from the several minute montage you just watched, this was really horrible. Removing the seam sealer was next level. It took days. As you can see from my disheveled look and still have some of this stuff all over me, I removed several pounds of this undercoating, rubberized seam sealer stuff from the car. Anywhere that was factory still wasn't too bad, but anything that had been done by the previous repair was awful. They just put it all over everything, everywhere. But now it is mostly removed. So I'm gonna walk you guys through what needs to be done next. And we're gonna take a look at drilling, unscrewing stuff, as well as removing some panel bond. And there's a couple welds we have to grind. So let's take a look. Here's the upper shotgun piece. And this whole piece is new, or will be new, and this is part of the cowl. So we got to remove some screws here, and then there's panel bond underneath. You can see there's some screws here and more panel bond. There's actually a weld up here we have to grind off, and this whole piece kind of fits into a channel here in the body. So this is going to be fun. Got a lot of panel bond in here, so a lot of adhesive. You can see all the blue stuff, that's panel bond. So we're going to heat it up, try to break it loose. And then you can see it comes down here. There's the lower joint. There's more rivets here. There's no welds, but there's a couple rivets in this panel, a couple rivets here, and then this joint, this is the seam here where it pulls off. That's the top section. Then we come down, there's the bottom section here. So these I've already started to kind of drill just to test to see how it went, and so far it wasn't too bad. Then there's a couple screws we have to undo. This I thought was bolting to the car, but I believe this is actually just holding together the front structure that we're gonna be replacing anyway. Underneath is where it gets a little difficult, because this joint is sort of hard to figure out, because you can see the panel comes in here, and then underneath it actually slides into, it's a little hard to get on video. It actually slides into the body. So there's some interior panels that you actually have to remove, and there's a weld here we'll grind. But right in this joint here, let's see if we can see it, it's a little bit hard to figure out what's going on. So that's gonna be a challenge. I don't have the new part yet to look at, so I'm gonna kind of guess there, but then we can kind of see where it goes up against the firewall. This should be pretty straightforward. There's a rivet, goes over, and then comes down here. There's another flange. Then I ground everything down. So there's a couple rivets. Then on the inside, you can see the same thing. So comes down, goes along the firewall. There's some rivets that we're gonna drill out, and you'll see them again on the inside. And then it goes underneath, and there's the seam here. Same thing on the other side, basically just mirrors this side. So now they give you a little tour of all the things we got to remove. I'm going to start by drilling out all these rivets, and then I'm going to remove all the bolts. And once the rivets are drilled, we'll do that little countersinking trick I showed earlier, get all those cleaned up. Then we're going to move to the inside, remove any bolts, grind any welds, Then we're gonna heat this thing up and see if we can start breaking that bond and pulling off the front. So wish me luck. This is probably gonna be a bear, and I imagine this is gonna take a bit. But once that's done, that's gonna be the majority of the damage of the car removed. This whole piece is coming from Porsche. Super excited to put a new one on. That's really gonna transform this car. I thought about just replacing parts of this, which it looks like they did in the previous accident, but then the more I looked at it, the more it's just a whole new front to make sure everything's square, because the last thing I want to do is put this thing back together and then take it for its first alignment and to find out the front end isn't on right and it's crabbing down the road or can't get aligned. That would be really, really crappy. So if you're gonna do it right, that's what I say. So we're gonna put a new front on this. So let's get to it. It's really important to keep your drill bit cool and lubricated. So you're gonna notice oil dripping from the holes that I'm drilling, and that's because throughout the drilling process, I'm consistently dipping the drill in oil, and that actually helps the longevity of the bit. In fact, I drilled all the holes on this car, which is mostly hardened steel rivets, spot welds, with only one drill bit. So it lasted quite a long time. The lubrication really, really helps. So in some cases, you still need to grind a little bit of the spot weld or the rivet in order to extract it. So that's what I'm doing here. And then you're gonna see me use a punch tool and a hammer to really knock out those rivets clean, and you can see the holes underneath are nice and round, getting the panel ready to be heated and debonded. Now you're seeing me start to grind the welds. This was the least fun thing of all of the front end removal process. Honestly, grinding welds really just isn't fun. It sucks. And I've cut out a lot of the shenanigans, so you're welcome. Now, after I finish drilling, you're gonna notice I use the countersink tool. This is really used to get rid of any rivet head material or shaft material prior to punching it out, making it a lot easier to extract. Now we move into the inside where we're grinding off the welds. These were a bit of a pain because there was a series of welds holding the front end in to the main structure of the car. I ended up removing some of the fasteners first because they were just kind of in the way, and then I just kept grinding. And now we're done. I spared you the weld, rivet, and screw removal from the passenger side because it was just kind of redundant. But here you can see the finished product. Everything's pretty much done, and we're now getting ready to heat up and remove the structural bond. So you can really see how the front is attached to the car. So now you're seeing the upper shotgun as we move down to the lower portion and the crash rail. After I started moving, I got the hang of it and it went over pretty smooth. It was a bit time consuming and messy, especially grinding the wells, but overall I'm really happy with the results. So now we're gonna start heating and debonding the panels. To begin, I started with a heat gun, and you're gonna see me heat up the panels and then use a hammer to try to separate the bond, which works pretty well. Unfortunately, it just takes a really long time to get enough heat into the panel to separate the bond. It's unfortunate because my microphone stopped working partway through here because there's a few times when during the heating process you could actually hear the bond pop off, which is really cool. So here I'm heating up the panel and using a wedge to apply a little bit of pressure to the joint, which helps just separate the bond. You can already see the top cowl piece has separated, but it became very clear very quickly that the heat gun just wasn't enough. So much to my reluctance, I switched to a torch. I wanted to avoid the torch because it can cause local annealing and whatnot on the panels, but really it was just unbearably slow to use the heat gun by itself. All right, we spent days grinding down welds, heating up panel bond, drilling out rivets, and I think we're finally done, I think. So it looks like this thing's ready to come off. There's been a little bit of movement, although if I shake it here, if you watch, yeah, it's pretty stuck still. So we don't have a fancy frame machine where we can clamp down the body and just yank off panels and stuff. So we got a little creative. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna tie it down on the back. It's already secured to the lift, and then we're gonna use a kind of winch type thing called a come-along, which I'll show you in a second, to apply a little bit of pressure on the front so that if any place is still stuck, we can work that area till it pops off. So stick with me, we're gonna get started on that right now. We rigged up the GT3 onto the lift. We strapped it down. So we got a bunch of straps underneath holding it down to the lift since we don't have a frame machine. We got straps in the rear holding it down, and we got our trusty forklift. And what we've done is actually hooked the subframe up to the forklift, so you can see that under here. So we're gonna add tension with the forklift holding it back. This guy weighs a lot, and also has the forks under here just in case it falls. And then we used our trusty H1 Hummer to hook up the front via a come-along. So we don't have a winch on this thing, so we're gonna use the come-along to give it a little bit of force and pull this front end off. Nothing screams subtle and precise than an H1 Hummer, so we figured it'd be appropriate here. And it weighs a lot. So we're gonna try this, see if it works. I anticipate there still being a couple spots. In fact, I'm pretty sure the frame rails are actually still attached via panel bond underneath here, but I cannot get to the back behind that. So we'll see, let's give it a shot. All right guys, quick update. We tried to pull the front end off with the come-along yesterday, but no dice. So what ended up happening is it got stuck. And I think it got stuck because right here, after doing some research, there's panel bond underneath the main crash rail. So if you look here, this is the main crash rail, which goes into the body structure here. And there's a big piece of extruded aluminum that comes across and ties the front end together. And that is actually connected to this piece inside the passenger well. So you can see it goes in here and goes over there. Right under here is panel bond, which bonds this front crash rail to this bar. So what I'm gonna try to do is pull this up, stick something in here, heat this, and pop it off. So after trying to pry some of it away and heat and seeing if I could get a wedge in there, it didn't work at all, so I just cut a hole in the side. And I did it pretty carefully though, because I really didn't want to hit any of the structure of the car, so it was a bit far off the car, and I was like peeling back a little of the front end that I'm going to be replacing so I could get a look at this joint a bit better, and I have to say it worked out pretty well. As you'll see in a second, you can really see the cross-section of the joint. So now what you're looking at is the front crash bar that's on the car, and then you can see some of the panel bond and then the front end mounted to it. So now I know exactly where I need to heat and what bonds I need to break. It's also apparent though that I couldn't do this really well from the outside. So time to bust out the Sawzall. Now luckily the front of the car is aluminum, so it was actually pretty easy to cut through. I did get stuck on one spot where the upper control arm mount, which we'll see in a second, but otherwise went pretty smoothly. Actually, it was kind of a lot of fun, I gotta admit. Hacking through a GT3 with the Sawzall, not too many people get to do that. So here I'm just showing you that the front upper control arm mount was a bit of a bear to get through because it's cast solid aluminum. And it was also at this point that my mic died, so you're gonna get some voiceover for a little bit. I repeated the same process on the driver's side, but just forgot to record it in my haste to cut things. Then went back to the come-along and the Hummer because I didn't want to detach the tops because they were mostly off. And here I'm just working on the driver's side because the passenger side actually came right off. The driver's side was a little stuck. There was a spot weld in there that hadn't quite broken. So now I'm just gonna heat it up and try to get that off. But you can see just how well the Sawzall hacked through the lower portion of the front and how well the top came off. So that's some panel bond on the passenger side. So I'm just gonna heat up that panel just in case there's any panel bond underneath, but mostly it ended up just being a spot weld that was stuck. And boy, was it gratifying to finally have this front end come off, as you'll see in a second. Just having it pull off, it was really quite nice after what ended up being several days of work. Seeing this thing come off was great. So now you can clearly see, since the Sawzall cut right through, where the front end is and where the passenger cell is. And what I'm pointing at now is the damage that was done in the accident. There was no way to save this front end. The casting's damaged, all the support structure inside is damaged. So it's really a good thing that we're replacing it, but it's pretty neat to see a cross section of the front end, and also gives us a lot of access to where the panel bond is, which is right behind that piece, which is what I'm pointing to right now. So you can see the outline of the crash structure, and underneath there, that flat piece there is panel bonded to that front cross member. So we have to heat that up and get underneath of it and pry it off, which I'm about to get to next. So more heat and more prying is the solution here. Now it's really unfortunate that my mic died, because as I was heating this up, you could literally hear the bond break between the two panels. It was extremely satisfying. So I had to wedge in a little bit more, but generally speaking, it was right about this point where the front just kind of popped off. So the only thing holding it in at this point was underneath, there's a piece of metal that goes into the cabin that was just a little stuck, but I got that off, and now you can see the front removed. Now that the front's off, you can clearly see where the panel bond was, where the rivets and welds are, and how hard it was to get to that front crash piece, that cross member. There was a ton of panel bond there, which is why we just couldn't pull it off before, but it also shows how strong this is, because we had to come along and a Humvee pull in, and that was not coming off. The passenger side didn't require quite as much as the driver's side and ended up coming off a little bit easier. Of course, I also learned quite a bit from pulling off the driver's side, but it wasn't as stuck inside the passenger cell as the driver's side was. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the front is off. All right, that's gonna be it for today. We made a ton of progress. We finally got the front end off the GT3. It's a big moment. Bit of a celebration here. You can see all the joints, all the panel bonds, some of the burn marks where I used the torch, but it's a big relief. There's not a lot of extra damage here. So it looks like we finally removed the majority of the damaged parts. Now we've got to prep this firewall, get all this panel bond off, remove some of this extra seam sealer, clean it up, and get ready for that new front end. But I'm actually going to take a break from doing the front for a little bit, because honestly, I'm getting kind of tired of grinding and getting all dirty and panel bond and torches and everything. And we're going to remove the engine and rear suspension on the car next. Take a look at that, see what's going on. But if you like what you see, click that subscribe button, turn on those notifications, because we post a new video every week and you don't want to miss any of the action.